I was 28 years old when I discovered that my parents had been lying to me for almost 2 decades. The truth came out because of a leaking faucet. I know that sounds ridiculous, but sometimes the biggest family secrets unravel because of the smallest accidents. 3 months ago, I received a phone call from a contractor in Columbus, Ohio. He asked if I wanted him to repair a plumbing issue at my rental property on Maple Street. I thought he had the wrong number. I had never owned a rental property. I lived nearly 400 miles away in Charlotte, North Carolina. I worked as a project coordinator for a logistics company. I rented a modest apartment. My savings account had just over $11,000 in it. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to think I owned a house in Ohio. Yet before that phone call ended, I learned that not only did I own a house there, I had apparently owned it for 19 years. And according to the records that contractor sent me later that day, someone had been collecting rent from that property every single month during those 19 years. The people collecting that money were my parents. Before I tell you how I uncovered everything, hit like and subscribe if you enjoy family drama stories. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now let me take you back. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, as an only child. My father, Richard, worked in sales for a building supply company. My mother, Denise, worked part-time as a dental receptionist. To anyone looking from the outside, we seemed like a normal middle-class family. We lived in a 3-bedroom ranch house. We took modest vacations. We never appeared wealthy. But we also never seemed to struggle. One thing always stood out to me growing up. My grandparents on my father's side absolutely adored me. My grandfather, Harold, was a quiet man who had spent 40 years operating a small roofing business. My grandmother, Evelyn, was warm, funny, and somehow knew exactly what everyone needed to hear. I was their only grandchild. Every Saturday, they picked me up. Every birthday was celebrated at their house. Every school achievement ended with Grandpa Harold slipping a $20 bill into my pocket and telling me not to waste it. Looking back, there were clues. Little comments. Little moments. Things I didn't understand as a child. Sometimes Grandpa would put his arm around my shoulder and say, "Don't worry, kid. We've made sure you'll always have something of your own." I never knew what he meant. When I was 9 years old, I remember sitting at their kitchen table while my grandparents argued quietly with my parents. I wasn't supposed to hear it. But I did. Grandma said, "It belongs to him." My mother replied, "He's a child." Grandma answered, "Exactly. That's why we protected it." The conversation stopped when they noticed me listening. At the time, I forgot about it. Years later, I remembered every word. My grandparents were careful with money. Not rich. Not flashy. Just smart. Grandpa owned several small rental properties over the years. Nothing huge. Just ordinary working-class houses. He believed real estate was the safest investment a person could make. He used to say, "People always need somewhere to sleep." When I was 16, he started teaching me about property ownership. Taxes. Mortgages. Insurance. Tenant screening. I thought he was just sharing life lessons. Now I realize he was preparing me for something. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to explain. When I was 18, my grandfather suffered a stroke. 6 months later, he passed away. My grandmother followed less than 2 years after that. Losing them devastated me. I felt like I had lost the only people who truly understood me. After their deaths, my parents handled everything. The estate. The paperwork. The legal matters. I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. When I asked whether Grandpa had left anything behind, my father told me the estate had been small and mostly consumed by medical expenses. I believed him. I never questioned it. That was my mistake. For the next decade, life moved on. I graduated college. Started working. Got married. Got divorced. Moved states. Built a career. Like most people, I became busy surviving my own life. My parents and I stayed reasonably close. We spoke every few weeks. Visited during holidays. Nothing seemed unusual. Yet there were occasional moments that felt strange. My parents always seemed financially comfortable. More comfortable than their jobs should have allowed. They remodeled their kitchen. Bought newer vehicles. Took cruises every year. Meanwhile, both complained constantly about money. I never thought much about it. Then came the phone call. The leaking faucet. The contractor. The mistake that changed everything. "Mr. Carter?" the caller asked. "Yes. This is Mike from Maple Property Maintenance. We received authorization for the repair, but I wanted confirmation before beginning." "I think you have the wrong person." "No, sir. You're listed as the property owner." I laughed. "I'm definitely not." There was silence. Then he read an address. A small house in Columbus. One I'd never heard of. I told him again he had the wrong person. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "The county records show ownership under Ethan Carter." My full name. Not a common name. My exact legal name. Suddenly, I wasn't laughing anymore. I asked him to email whatever records he had. 20 minutes later, my inbox filled with documents. Property tax records. Maintenance requests. Ownership information. Everything pointed to me. I sat frozen at my desk. The ownership date showed 19 years earlier. When I was 9 years old. None of it made sense. Comment below if you've ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you viewed your childhood. Because what happened next felt like stepping into someone else's life. I contacted the county recorder's office. The woman there confirmed everything. The house legally belonged to me. It always had. No ownership transfers. No recent changes. Just my name. For 19 years. I asked how that was possible. She suggested obtaining copies of the original deed. So I did. 2 days later, I received them. The buyers were listed as Harold and Evelyn Carter. My grandparents. The ownership designation was structured through a custodial arrangement for a minor beneficiary. That beneficiary was me. My grandparents had purchased the property specifically for me. 19 years earlier. And according to the legal records, ownership transferred fully to me when I turned 18. No one had informed me. No one had contacted me. No one had given me the paperwork. Nothing. I felt sick. But the worst part was still coming. The rental history showed management contacts. Payment recipients. Banking references. Every road led back to one place. My parents. For nearly 2 decades, rent checks had been deposited into accounts they controlled. Month after month. Year after year. I started doing rough calculations. The house rented for approximately $1,100 per month during recent years. Less in earlier years. More in later years. Conservatively, the property had generated over $200,000 in rental income. Maybe more. I couldn't breathe. I kept looking for another explanation. There had to be one. Maybe my parents managed the property legally. Maybe they were saving the money. Maybe there was a trust. Maybe there was paperwork I didn't know about. I wanted desperately to believe that. Then I called them. My mother answered. I asked a simple question. Do I own a house in Columbus? Silence. Long silence. The kind that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Finally she said, "Where did you hear that?" Not no. Not confusion. Not surprise. Just panic. I repeated the question. My father got on the line. His voice sounded tense. Then came the first lie. No, of course not. I told him I had the deed. Another long silence. Then the story changed. Well, technically. Technically. The favorite word of dishonest people. That conversation lasted nearly an hour. Every 10 minutes the explanation changed. First they forgot. Then they misunderstood. Then they thought I knew. Then they claimed Grandpa wanted them to manage it. Nothing lined up. Nothing made sense. Finally I asked the question they couldn't answer. If Grandpa intended me to own it, why didn't you tell me when I turned 18? Neither responded. Because there was no good answer. I flew to Ohio the following weekend. I wanted documents. Facts. Proof. Not excuses. The first stop was the property itself. It was a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy. But well maintained. A family lived there. Good tenants. The husband invited me inside after I explained who I was. What he said shocked me. Your parents have always been the landlords. Always. 19 years. The tenants had no idea anyone else owned the house. To them, Richard and Denise Carter were the owners. The husband even showed me copies of recent rent payments. My parents had been collecting everything. Directly. Openly. Confidently. As if the property belonged to them. I left that house shaking. Not because of the money. Because of the betrayal. The next day, I met with an attorney. She reviewed everything. Then she looked at me and asked a question. Do you want the legal answer or the family answer? I told her both. The legal answer is that the property appears to belong entirely to you. And the family answer? She sighed. The family answer is that someone expected you never to discover this. Those words stayed with me. Someone expected me never to find out. Someone had counted on my trust. Then the hidden advantage appeared. The thing my parents never anticipated. My grandfather had been smarter than everyone. Including them. When my attorney requested historical estate records, she discovered a sealed letter referenced in the original purchase documentation. A letter written by my grandfather. A letter intended for me. The county archive still had a copy. I read it 3 days later. And I cried. In the letter, Grandpa explained everything. 19 years earlier, he had purchased the house because he worried about my parents' spending habits. He loved them. But he didn't trust them financially. So he bought the property in my name. His goal was simple. Provide me with a stable financial foundation when I became an adult. The house wasn't meant for my parents. It was meant for me. Then came the sentence that changed everything. If Richard or Denise attempt to claim ownership or income from this property beyond reasonable management expenses, such actions are against my wishes and against the purpose for which this property was purchased. I read that sentence 5 times. Then 10. Then 20. Grandpa knew. He had anticipated exactly what might happen. Comment if you've ever had a grandparent who quietly protected you in ways you didn't understand until much later. Because mine absolutely did. The letter contained one final surprise. A second property. Not a house. A vacant lot. Purchased at the same time. Also in my name. Also unknown to me. Also managed by my parents. The difference? The land had appreciated dramatically. Developers were actively buying property nearby. Its value had exploded. Suddenly this wasn't just about a rental house. It was about an entire hidden estate. One my grandparents had built specifically for me. When I confronted my parents again, everything fell apart. The lies stopped. The excuses stopped. The truth finally emerged. My father admitted they had discovered the arrangement shortly after my grandfather's death. They intended to tell me eventually. Then years passed. The rent became part of their lifestyle. The money paid bills. Vacations. Car payments. Home improvements. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. Then it became impossible to explain. So they kept hiding it. I asked how much money they had collected. Neither could answer. Or wouldn't. My mother cried. My father became defensive. He said they deserved compensation for managing the properties. Maybe they did. But not 19 years of income. Not secrecy. Not deception. Not theft. For weeks, I barely slept. I wasn't thinking about the money. I was mourning my relationship with my parents. Trust is difficult to measure. But once broken, you feel its absence everywhere. Every childhood memory became suspect. Every conversation felt different. I kept wondering how many times they had discussed the properties while sitting across from me at dinner. How many birthdays? How many holidays? How many phone calls? All while pretending nothing existed. That hurt more than any financial loss. Eventually, negotiations began. Through attorneys. Not family conversations. Attorneys. Which tells you everything about where we ended up. The financial review took months. Records had to be reconstructed. Bank statements examined. Tax documents reviewed. When the final calculations were completed, the numbers were staggering. The total rental income over 19 years exceeded $300,000. Expenses reduced that amount substantially. But not enough. There was still a massive gap. Money that should have belonged to me. Money my grandparents intended for me. Money my parents had used themselves. In the end, we reached a settlement. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted closure. The rental house remained mine. The vacant land remained mine. My parents agreed to repay a significant portion of the documented income through asset transfers and structured payments. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could undo 19 years. But it was something. Most importantly, the truth finally existed in daylight. No more secrets. No more lies. No more pretending. A month later, I visited my grandparents' graves. I brought copies of the original deed. And Grandpa's letter. I sat there for nearly an hour. Talking out loud like they could hear me. Maybe they could. I thanked them. Not for the money. Not for the properties. For believing in me. For trying to protect my future. For leaving evidence behind. For anticipating a problem before it happened. Most of all, for making sure the truth could eventually be found. Because without that letter, I might have doubted myself forever. Today, the rental property still generates income. The land is under contract with a developer. Ironically, my financial future is now stronger because of a decision my grandparents made nearly 20 years ago. A decision I didn't even know existed. My relationship with my parents is complicated. We're speaking again. Carefully. Slowly. But things will never be exactly the same. Some betrayals leave permanent scars. Even when forgiveness eventually arrives. And yes, I believe forgiveness matters. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. One can return. The other must be rebuilt. Sometimes over years. Sometimes never. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. The people who truly love you don't just tell you they care. They make sacrifices for your future. Sometimes sacrifices you won't understand until much later. My grandparents weren't wealthy. They weren't powerful. But they thought ahead. they planned. They protected me in the only way they knew how. And 19 years after they were gone, that protection still worked. Because the truth eventually has a way of surfacing. Even if it takes a leaking faucet. Even if it takes 19 years. Even if the people hiding it are your own family. So let me ask you. If you discovered that your parents had hidden something worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from you for nearly 2 decades, would you forgive them? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more family drama stories every week. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of the people who truly earn your trust.